there's a couple people with 5 absences. I'm like, it's 2.5 weeks. Oh, good. Yeah. All right. I know that's not a you problem. It's a me problem. So I don't want them to fall through the cracks. All right. This next project is probably one of the most important and formative ones. Important and formative ones that you're going to be doing this semester, because it deals with fit. Right now, you haven't actually had to make your projects fit anything. Last semester in design one, it was all just concepts. You know, building forms, making spaces, defining things, circulation patterns, hierarchical patterns, those are concepts. This semester we took a look at this intense integration of this 3D technology, this process of idea generation, diagramming something out, transforming it to something new. Let me just put your computer down. So this actually starts to be probably a project that resembles more of what architecture is than the ones you've experienced in the past. Those tend to be about architectural order. How do you form ideas? How do you integrate the technology? But this one is sort of critical. And this has to do with fit, architectural fit. And there's a quote by Ching, in addition, that means you're adding on, to an existing order requires first that the ordering system of the prior or prototypical model be perceived and understood, so that through a series of finite changes and permutations, the original design concept can be clarified, strengthened, and built upon rather than destroyed. That's kind of a good quote about fit. And that's a pretty narrow perspective. I'll give you one outside of architecture. Fit is really important because things that don't fit don't do well. Well, you can probably, it's all right. If you're not going to fit into an organization, are you going to do well? Probably not. If you're going to not fit for the occasion or the context, like a beach or a funeral or a wedding or an academic environment or a business environment, I mean, you're probably not going to do well. You go into a business meeting and you look like you're ready for the beach. And that's probably a bad sign. So it's like, yeah, it's way too casual. I think they're going to focus on what I'm going to do. That's that fit problem. The problem with that is that it's a cultural thing that, you know, how do you get to know that? You're in the culture long enough and then you understand what the rules are. It's implicit. It's not like you can go to maybe AI can tell you, how do I possibly fit into this? Give me all the rules and regulations and the structure of it. So architecture has a dimension of that fit. When we design buildings, they're always set in time, culture, and place. So when we design something, it makes sense to the people that actually are in the context in that time. So buildings that were designed in the 1950s very much make sense to people that grew up in the 50s. One of the things about the 50s is that it was a very conformist time, very modern. Everyone had to conform. If you didn't conform to that mold, what was the mold? I'll give you an analogy. I'll give you what we call an archetype. An archetype is sort of like a generalized idea of what you keep in memory as to how things are. There was a TV show called Father Knows Best in the 1960s, and it was about a doctor. He had a profession. He worked, a stay-at-home mom, 2 kids, a dog, a picket fence, and a house, and they had a station wagon. And that became kind of like a cultural norm for society in the 1960s. Today, that's not the way we actually do things. So that made sense to that group. If that show was to come on today, we'd be like, that's a bizarre show. Who the heck would watch that? You know, it was just we live in a plural society. different sets of rules, different gender boundaries, different job roles. There's a whole host of things. So the benefit that you folks face is in architecture, those changing cultural values and things that mean something always mean job security and job employment, because you can't take an old building and reuse it again. The same thing is true with, you can't take an old building and expect it to work. Buildings that were built, let's say, in the 1960s, you know, those are 16 years old, give or take. How organizations function, business function, even nuclear families function is totally transformed. We no longer define them in those very structured roles. They now have different structures, and there's no such thing as good or bad, they're just different. I mean, we have different structures, that's how things work. So, if you take a look at, for example, houses that were built in the 1960s, what they typically had, at least, except for the people rich, bless you, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, and bedrooms. There was no such thing as a master suite, but that didn't happen. It was never. Did they have a big family room? No, they had a living room. Who had enough money to actually have two rooms? Most people came from New York City, or a big city, and after World War II, you had this suburban boom, and they're building, you know, mass producing these buildings, houses that people lived in. Kitchen was typically the woman's domain, which I'm like, you know, I do all the cooking and I do most of the kitchen cleaning. But that is not a gender role that's no longer that's specifically defined anymore. Actually, I you know, but in the '60s, a guy going into the kitchen was like, what are you doing there? You know, do you need help? That was kind of the weird stuff that went on. Folks that came in late, you want to take some notes because we are going over Project 2. It's critical. So this notion of fit, you know, becomes really important because there's no houses that were built in the 1960s have always transformed themselves to fit current modern needs. Businesses that were operating in the 1960s, if that structure is still the same that's operating today, they're out of business unless they're a branch of the federal government. They're not, who knows what they do. Or the post office. So even the post office is transformed, how they move stuff around. There's no businesses that survive that work the same way. I found this when I was practicing architecture. Businesses are always changing, innovating. Today, half the workforce has a remote day. I mean, they're set up to actually not be physically in that space, and they work collaboratively and remotely with teams of people all throughout the country. You just never. Jocelyn, you want to take some notes? We're going on Project 2. I understand you caused an accident on the LIE. That's terrible.
Yeah, people can't drive.
Yeah. Something like that. All right. That's not what I want. So on one level, this is what makes architecture so hard for great architects, is seeing this fit. It's very similar to music. Like, you know, why is it the Beatles were able to pick up and write all that great music? Are they super talented musicians? Well, I looked at the Beatles tunes, and frankly, I can play them on the piano. And I haven't taken music lessons, but it's easy. Billy Joel's work is very hard to play on the piano if you're a musician. You're like, that guy's classical, the timing, the sharps, he writes everything in minor chords. What a pain in the neck that is. But you know, the Beatles hit it, and it connected. Music is that way. all the arts are that way. Why is it some movies come out today and they resonate with us and others don't? Architecture has that dimension. So that's one level of connection that you have to have with the culture. There's another level, so that's at the 50,000 foot. You're way up at the very top looking down. And by the way, why is it there are no great architects at 25 or 30? Why is it there's no great writers at 25 or 30? Well, that's because those things connect culturally much more than anything else. Music is an oddball thing. Like music and chess, you can have a music prodigy. They may not be a composer, but a music prodigy or a chess prodigy in their early 20s. It's not possible with architecture. Why? Because it's this cultural connection, this ability to see and understand and feel. You say, so why not? Well, when you're 20, you haven't experienced life, and so you don't know the highs, the lows, the sorrows, the heights of success, the depths of pain that you understand when you're 50 or 60. And architects pick up on all of that and put it into some sort of mix when they do these buildings. That's why a lot of great architects tend to be later 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then go into 70s and 80s. And look at Frank Gehry, they're much older people. So that's one level of understanding this architecture connection. That's a high level. I'm gonna go down to the fundamental level. This is gonna apply much more to the stuff that you learned in Design 1. So if architecture is this big cultural connection, a function, technology, cultural value, at this super high level, at this very low level, architecture is about these patterns. So what is it about patterns? Patterns of circulation, patterns of structure, patterns of form, patterns of use, patterns of enclosure, additive, subtractive patterns. There's a whole host of patterns that when you go to take a building, you can think of a building as like my fingers. It has a series of patterns. And if you want to connect to it somehow, you're going to wind up connecting in a way that it's not just this pattern and this is what you're trying to do, because this doesn't really connect very well. Now, if this was the case, that could possibly connect. But if you've got something that looks like this, how do you connect with it? What are the ways that you can actually possibly connect in order to make those patterns work? Because if the patterns don't connect at that lower level, then the whole thing doesn't really function very well. So let me give you a direct example. Let's say a building has a circulatory system that you can identify, like from Design 1. Radial, linear, grid, network, who knows, pick one, right? Those are the basic concepts. If you have a circulatory pattern and your new building doesn't actually connect to that pattern in a meaningful way, how do you get from here to there? I mean, it doesn't really work, right? In terms of function or use, you could say, well, the building could have work functions here, sleep functions here, socialized functions here. And when you go to put new patterns in, how do you actually make that work? I mean, would you want loud functions next to quiet functions? Do you want to put your social functions, group them together, or do you want to leave them apart? And if you do, what does that mean? So there's a whole host of things that go on with this notion of how do you add on? But this is really what makes architecture successful. I remember sitting on the planning board in Brookhaven a couple years ago, and one of the old firms I worked for, Wiedersum Associates, which has been bought out by H2M, they wind up coming for the planning board, and they were doing a walk-in medical clinic in North Patchogue. And I'm looking at the building they designed, and there's a set of stairs going down to a basement. And they have all these bars around the stairs because in the basement they had medical, they were storing drugs. And I said to them, I said, that's a really terrible look for the front of the building. It says to the community there's a crime problem and there's a theft problem. Who the heck puts bars on the front of buildings? I said, you have to actually do a building, if you want to upscale the neighborhood, you have to do a building that actually communicates a higher social value than this. Let me give you for another instance about how things connect before I get into the project. I'll just leave it this way. Right. In the 1950s, in East St. Louis, the pattern of buildings looked like this. And they see the scale. And they had an architect, Minoru Yamasaki. He's from Japan, Japanese architect. He's a modernist. And modern architects tended to look at architecture as there's a universal standard. If, like, everyone's gonna live the same way. It's part of that father knows best analogy I used about that TV show in the early 1960s with Robert Young, who's now dead. Like, yeah, mention that to your grandparents, they'll say, yeah, I knew that. Or maybe great-grandparents. Depends on how old you are. He comes in and decides, I'm gonna do this housing project. Now, Minoru Yamasaki is also the same guy that did the old World Trade Center, which I can use as a great example. So he builds this housing project that looks like this, and this is the existing context around it. Does this look like anything around the existing patterns of building? Does that look like anything around here? So what they did is, this was to help poor people. So you get a Japanese architect, another culture, who says, we're gonna do this big housing project in order to help all these poor people. We're gonna knock down all these little houses, they called them like slums. And I'm like, what? They were still working, and they built this. And 20 years later, they had to blow it up because it was one of the worst crime-infested, dysfunctional housing solutions to ever affect the American urban scene. It's a great example. Had they left the buildings like this instead of doing this, because when they designed this, they had a whole set of cultural rules. Like every third floor had a vertical neighborhood, so you can see them in here. And I'm like, it became lawless wastelands of crime, and it's just nuts. Same architect, Minoru Yamasaki, in the 1960s. Now, this World Trade Center site, no one in this room was alive then. Right? This came down in 2001. Everyone's born after 2001. But I've been to the top of these World Trade Center buildings. So this was the existing pattern of Manhattan. And this was the new, I went here and walked through, and there's this big open concrete plaza that when you were in here, you didn't feel like you were in Manhattan. These two bland boxes that just went up for 110 stories straight. And this thing right here did not fit in with any of this here. Look at the scale of the buildings. What, and none of this existed. This was all waterfront. And I'm like, it was one of the worst urban projects to ever exist. When they came back, after the buildings came down, 10, 15 years ago, they had a competition. And Daniel Libeskind won, and these became two reflecting pools. But they took the grid of Manhattan and were able to bring it back into the project to make this thing connect with the existing context. This was one of the most unsuccessful projects. It's up there with Prud'igo, except it didn't have a crime problem. This is a much more integrated system within the fabric of Lower Manhattan. These are two examples of architecture on a vast scale. And what does it show? It shows patterns. Patterns of space, patterns of circulation, patterns of function, patterns of enclosure, a bunch of other stuff. So this now you go down here and you're like, this actually now you feel like you're part of Manhattan. When you stood here, you're just in a world of your own. And really Lower Manhattan, this was the beauty of Lower Manhattan. Not that. This is Trinity Church right over here. That's the churchyard. That's Wall Street. All right. That's why we're doing this project. We want to take a look at context and fit. How do we fit into an existing context and make it appropriate? And the other thing is, how do we do it without destroying the thing we're adding on to? Now you could say to yourself, the thing that we're adding on to is so defective and so bad, we're just gonna knock it down and start all over. That's one solution and it's one approach, but that's not the approach we're gonna take here. We're gonna really seriously look at the notion of fit and how this actually works. The Smith family has commissioned you to design an addition to their house on the shore of Long Island Sound. The original was designed in 1965 by architect Richard Meyer. So 1965, how old is that? Well, that's 61 years ago. So you're like, that's old. Well, I'm older, so get over it. It's not that old. It's been widely published and internationally known. So this is a famous building. You can't just rip it down, you can't destroy it. It's a noted piece of what we call modern with the inklings of postmodern space. Now it's not a postmodern building because it's still in this modernist language or vocabulary of white machine architecture, but spatially it's much more postmodern in its spatial thinking and layering. Unfortunately, the owner's needs have changed since the original design, thereby warranting this architectural intervention. The owner specifically requested the integrity of the original design be respected, yet the new addition should have its own presence. Meaning, you still have to put some value and meaning into the addition, but it somehow has to fit with the existing thing. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to do more of Richard Meyer, just slice off, let's just take him and extrude him. Because the building itself and some of the organizational stuff is very old. It's not workable. If you folks, you graduate and you make a ton of money and you go and buy a house on Long Island for $800,000 and it's a fixer-upper, you're like, $800,000 for a fixer-upper. Yeah, that's kind of what's going on out there. You're gonna wanna change it around. I mean, when I bought my house in 2008, this is after I owned a house, it was paid off. I mean, I had to go, I took the whole thing apart and opened up the floor plan. I can show you that, what a mess that was. But I won't do that today. But you gotta make things work for today, especially these new functions. So what are the new functions? They're gonna be typical functions that we're gonna see that most clients actually ask us. Like when I practice architecture, I did residential projects for decades. Almost all of them, they take these old houses, 50s, 60s, they're like, I want a big master suite. That's the first thing they always ask for. I want a big family room. I want an open concept plan. Well, this house is pretty open concept, but. So that's what we're gonna take a look at. The functional requirements themselves. This is the need. So when a client comes to you and says, I want to add this on, or it's really, I need this and I need it to work. So, and by the way, this is online, so you can take a picture, but it is online. I'll show you where it is. So a master suite. So it has a master bedroom, a master bath, a walk-in closet, and an exercise room. And the exercise room is a duplex. So they have it either this way or this way, depending on how you want to do that. They don't want it in the same plane. That's their requirement. I mean, it seems like, all right, yeah, maybe who knows, maybe they want to separate that exercise room from their bedroom. This master suite thing, by the way, is kind of important. You know, with two people working, spouses working, their alone time and together time gets to be really limited. So a lot of times this becomes a space for them. Pretty much all you kids out of the room. They want to decompress, relax. If you're really working a high pressure job, you come home, you're like, I just need time just to relax. And then I want to spend time with my significant other, whoever that is. So these spaces are really, in many ways, sacred. You're going to see a lot of parents wanting to do this. The only time they're not so interested is when you have little kids between 1 and 5, and it's typically a maternal instinct. I need to be near them so I can hear them crying, and I'm like, I remember growing, as a dad, I'm like, I need to be as far away from them because I don't want to hear them cry. I don't know, maybe I don't know. I've become more sensitive, Maybe today if I had kids, I want to be near them so I can hear them cry. I can tell you my wife doesn't want to be near that stuff. So these become family room. When we take a look at this house, there's no family room. Now, by the way, in the 1970s, when they start adding these small family rooms, the dens, they call them den family room, that was so the kids could play in there, and if they made a mess and destroyed the furniture, the parents wouldn't get too upset. Because typically they had a living room where no one could go into. It was a shrine. It was a room, to be frank, was filled with furniture that was always in perfect condition and pictures of dead people, typically relatives, grandparents, And there were symbols of family that had family cultural value or meaning, historical meaning. So yeah, these rooms tended to be, so your parents say, don't go play in the living room, you're gonna ruin the furniture, I don't know. Maybe today you don't have a living room anymore, so you don't have that as a worry, but these rooms were very anachronistic. This notion of a formal dining room. A lot of people have moved away from that. Where do people eat now? I don't know, you have a party, everyone's standing around the kitchen with a big island, and they're all hovering, and no one really is sitting down. Yeah, what about a Christmas meal? All right, we need a big table, but sometimes just throw out a table in a big space and you're able to do it from there. My wife is trying to sell her mother's dining room set in Stony Brook, and there's no takers, and it's in perfect condition. And I'm like, yeah, it's a glass break front and a table and 6 chairs, and it's real condition. It's down like $800. Can't get rid of it. She paid $5,000 or $6,000 30 years ago for that, or 20 years ago. I'm like, I don't know, I'm gonna donate it to the poor. that'd be better. So that's, and then it's a formal outdoor space, 300 square feet. That's just deck area, because people entertain. So this is, now when we go to do this project, how are we gonna investigate this? Like Joe Betz is really into this 3D stuff. This is gonna be a 3D chess game, which is much different than the projects you did in Design 1, which were essentially 2D chess games, right? The exception of the blocks, the forms, and the planes, and the dowels, and some of those 3D models that you're making. This is gonna be a 3D chess game. So we're gonna utilize those skills of thinking in 3 dimensions. And by the way, your generation, I'm gonna say, you know, how are you gonna visualize architecture? My generation had to visualize it on paper as a 2D diagram, a plan. A 2D diagram is a section, and a 2D diagram is an elevation. Your generation is not even, you're gonna bypass that. Because we didn't have the tools to see things and model it virtually in 3D. You guys have it, it's this powerful tool. So when I would actually go onto a job site, I would take photos and I would draw little floor plans with measurements on it. Nowadays, you're not gonna do that. How are you gonna do that? You're gonna take your handheld scanner, you're gonna walk around, and you're gonna scan the space, and it's gonna be imported as a 3D object into CAD, and you're gonna, the outside, the inside rooms, and you'll be like, wow. And that's basically, you know, if you touch a pencil, I'd be like, it's gonna be really hard because everything's gonna be digital. Your environment is, and by the way, when you scan spaces, it doesn't create floor plans, it creates the 3D object, the physical 3D object. So you're gonna miss the slowness, the tediousness of having to take a 3D thing and draw it as a 2D thing. And then build a 3D actual model and cardboard to make this whole thing work. None of this is gonna happen. You guys are, you're gonna experience architecture much differently than I did. Now, as you can tell, I've actually bought into I bought into the system, so I'm willing to go there. But that's because I forced myself to learn how to draw this stuff. And, but you folks, so when you go to design this project, we're gonna design this as 3D diagrams, because if you've got a building with 3 different floors and how they relate, interact, it's hard to really draw this as just a 2D planar diagram. If you use that process, you're gonna get a completely different result than the results of thinking of this in terms of a 3D system. It's sort of like saying, you know, I'm gonna build a piece of furniture using just a hand saw and a miter box, and I'm like, that's gonna be crappy. Use a chop saw. And how am I gonna join things together? I'm gonna drill a hole, tap a brad, and then putty it. But no, I'm just gonna take it, clamp it, and pop it with a brad in an air nailer. I mean, there's so many, you know, there's all these different ways. So the tools you use and the experience of using them is going to transform. I know you guys talking about that accent again. Transform how the thing is made. So that's why this is important. So we're actually going to extrude these things as masses that eventually we're going to make into spaces. So the mass is just a placeholder for the space that it's going to be. Because it's hard to actually quickly draw 4 walls and windows, and you're just going to draw it as masses. So this is going to be a 3D chess game that's going to allow you to start to think about architecture much differently. All right, so when we take a look at a project professionally, this is just, forget this academic exercise. We take a look at a project professionally, like the hundreds and hundreds of residential stuff that I've done. that I had to sign and seal, put my name to. If the stupid thing falls down in 20 years, I'm still gonna get sued unless I'm dead. You're gonna have a need, and the client's gonna generate the need. You have to actually meet that need. If you don't, they're gonna fire you. You can tell them they don't have feng shui and, they don't really care, they're gonna fire you. Well, you don't really need this. And I'm like, there's no reason why they're doing this. The second thing is when you meet with a client, they're gonna have a story. What is the narrative? What are the values? What are the relationships? And sometimes you gotta pull that out of them. Like, how do you want this family room? Do you want it integrated with the other bedrooms? Do you want it sort of a step alone? Depending on, and I found that to be very specific to where they are in their lives. Whether they want a sanctuary or whether they want to be integrated into the whole darn thing. That's up to you. Also, you're gonna find that these people have a sort of a value system. Some of them be like, what you're really passionate in life. Oh, you know what? I really connect with the water and the sea. I really connect with, I'm really all about music. I've had students like, I'm a soccer enthusiast, and I'm like, how do you integrate that into a solution? I'll show you a couple of examples. So each one of these has a story with a value that's going to generate a ranking and a hierarchy of what's important and what's not. Because in a house you can't make everything important because there's no there. So you say to yourself, what do you mean by that? So for example, let's say you want to make your family room special. If all the ceilings are 8 foot in the house, and you make the family room 12 feet, or vaulted, or cathedraled, then all of a sudden the room becomes special, right? Because it's unique, it's quality. It's sort of like saying, I'm gonna put fancy molding in every single room, or am I gonna put it in a special room to highlight the social value of that particular room? I'm like, could you imagine all the rooms get big, fancy, heavy moldings and crown moldings and base moldings? And I'm like, would you do that in every room, or would you just be specific and tailor it to whatever you need to do? The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna diagram out the existing patterns within this building. So the last project, we did a lot of diagramming, right? We took existing prototypes and diagrammed those out. Then we took things that move and diagrammed them out. Kicking and screaming, I don't want to do this. Oh, yes, you want. Because that diagramming process is part of how we come to understand complicated things in architecture. We're going to pull off all of the things that are just static in background so we fully understand exactly what's going on. And sometimes we're actually going to look at particular patterns of circulation, patterns of use, patterns of structure, patterns of enclosure, patterns of additive subtractive forms. So what's that about? The best analogy I can use is, let's say you listen to how many of you were in orchestra or band in high school? Raise your hand.
Sorry, what was that?
How many of you were in orchestra or band in high school? Okay, there's a couple. The rest of you missed out on a great experience, the torturous experience of having parents show up. I never saw them practice that instrument. Why are they sitting 4 rows back in the orchestra? I remember telling my wife, I said, I thought Alex played the violin. Jeez, give me one of these things. No, I don't know what he played. Maybe Catherine plays the violin. No, she plays the flute. Don't you remember that? And I'm like, vaguely, I've never seen these instruments in our house. They both played piano and had tons of piano lessons, so these instruments are pretty simple, single notes. So if you're listening to an orchestra or band, and you're the conductor, you want to break it down into the parts. Like if you're Mozart and you're composing, you're writing the parts for all these instruments, string instruments, the percussion instruments, the woodwind instruments, you name it, and you're writing the parts to have them come in That's the symphony of making the whole music piece work. It's not just one. I think I'll just play the piano and there's nothing else. Now, a lot of times they may get the melody and the tune set up on the piano, but eventually you can, you comfortable? You can actually, anyway, it's been, I know. So, we want to diagram out those existing patterns. So we're going to take the 3D architecture, diagram it out, and then we're going to understand the context of how this whole thing works. We're then going to take this system of 3D, 2D, understand, we're going to add on the thing that we want, and we're going to get a 2D mass diagram and then 3D architectural diagram. That's kind of really where we're going. So we're going to take the reverse of the design process with which we looked at in design 1, deconstruct what's there, and then add on using that same process. We're also going to incorporate ideas into it to make sure the value system works. So you meet the need, and it becomes, and it has a value system. So that's going to be the process that we're going to take. This is all online. So what's the first stage we're going to do? We're actually going to, today we're going to break into teams, and we're going to start to diagram these patterns. Next week, I'll talk a little bit about this adding on business, but I won't do that. And then once we get past this and the narrative, you can start the design process. So, this is the immediate work that we need to do. We talk a little bit about the site. So I do have, thanks to, this is on Brightspace, by the way, under design projects, right? So you have to take pictures of it. It's all, you can download the whole thing. So I'm gonna download, this is the drawing you want to use. This is an old file. I should probably get rid of this one. Jerry, just watch, pay attention first, and then you can. So years ago, I had a couple students as slave labor take this house and draw it in 3D, and then I asked them, is it possible I could actually borrow your CAD file? And they said, sure, because I want to use that for future classes. So this way, you don't have to go and redraw this thing, because redrawing this thing could take you folks a week and a half. I mean, for me, I could probably whip it out a lot quicker, but I'm okay. And then a couple years after that, I found a better 3D model online. I'm like, I like my base, but I'm gonna use this 3D model. So what we have here is a 3D model of the Smith house on the property, minus the garage, which is sitting here. But we're not gonna worry about that. So this is the house. This is the water. This is Long Island Sound. This is actually a real site, so like I'll show you this. You're like, oh wow, real site. Yeah. This is the house all by itself. I just copied it and move it over. So the nice thing about this is you can get in here and take a look inside. I can take the roof off. So now you're like, wow. So you've got this space right here. There's a balcony up here. There's some bedrooms here. Kind of cool. Let's say I want to do some floor plans of stuff. Let's say I want to do a section of this. Let me go to View, View 2. I'll put this on top. Say I want to cut a section through this. I'll cut a section through this. Vertical section. Now, by the way, the nice thing about AutoCAD is it will I'm going to do a 3D section, but you can do a 2D. I'll pick the point. And there we have a, so if you're drawing in 3D, now by the way, I'm not a big fan of green. Like, what about money? Isn't that green? I'm like, yeah, it's close enough. There we go. So there's a 3D section of this house. You folks, if you use the 3D section, the section command? No one? All right. This is basically it. We'll pick a point. We're going to draw a plane where to cut it. I'm then going to drag it back, and I'm going to hit D for dialog box. It's going to come up and ask me whether. So let's say I want to take a look at this. I'm going to render this section. So there's two other commands, 3D section up, and that's on the screen up here. So there we go. There's a 3D section rendered. So if you want to know lower level, there's a balcony here, living room here, there's a deck out here, there's a glass wall here, there's a sitting room up here, there's a balcony up here, bedrooms up here. There's a roof terrace up here. By the way, if you want to render this, just type in render. Render is a really easy command. Does anyone use the render command? You can use the render command, by the way, even on your project. Just type in the word render. Like, wow, that looks pretty good, right? You know what's nice about this is you can actually take this rendering, if you wanted to, copy it, drop it into AI, tell AI, put a couple people in it, do a night view, so the house is sort of glowing, put some shrubs around this, and yeah, like ChatGTP, you get 5 free ones every day, and so you can actually pop this in, like, wow, that's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that cool? And Martha's like, can you really do that? Yeah, no, and make it photorealistic. You don't believe me? No, this is what's happening with the technology. It's boom, boom, boom. This is why you have to draw this way. If you're drawing this in pencil, you can't give it to AI. They're not gonna, especially your pencil work's gonna be all crappy and a bunch of other stuff. Then you have to scan it and put it in. It'd be a nightmare. So yeah, you can take this. You can try that at home. We'll do this later, maybe later this semester if people want to say, how do you do that? So yeah, if you draw this basic stuff in 3D modeling, you can drop it into AI and they'll bring it to life for you. You could take AI and say, turn this into a Rembrandt's painting. It probably would. It's so cool. You have no idea what's going on out there. What's occurring in the technology. So, let's say you wanted to take, just for funsies, like, how do you do a floor plan out of this? Whoops. Undo. Pick. Ah. It's upside down. Undo. There we go. So if I put this like this, let's say I want to do a floor plan of this first floor. Vertical section. Hit return. Pull it down. D for dialog. Generate 2D section. I'll pick a point. Pick. Okay. So there I have a floor plan. It's not perfect. Thank you. I can take that. Actually, I'm going to explode this. You can explode floor plans. You can't explode 3D objects in this section. Now I can match. I'll take something that's white. And then I'll get into this floor plan if I want to get rid of some of these crazy lines in here. This is the way AutoCAD draws it. We wouldn't want to do this. AutoCAD's not perfect. Some of these walls aren't hatched. Go into the hatch command. Pick. 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 All right. But you can see. So you mean to tell me if I draw this in 3D, the software will actually draw the plans in sections? Pretty much. Let's say I wanted to do just a 2D section of this. Enter. Oh, whoa. Hold on. I'm going to put it on wire diagrams so I don't have this problem. Pick, hit enter. Pull this back, pick, hit D for dialog. I'll put it on 2D, pick a point. This shows you now the ground, the floors post shade, and the stuff in elevation. Kind of cool, right? Who doesn't like that? Do you guys like drawing plans in sections? Well, if you design in 3D, no one wants to go back and draw this in 2D. And you also, a waste of time. So now, yeah. Now, you don't like green, we'll change the color of green, right, to white. That's easy to do. I can click on this, edit object display. I'm gonna change, side changes. How do you change this stuff here? By the way, I can explode this because it's in 2D. Actually, I don't want to do that. Click on this again. Is there, where's the green in here? By layer. Oh, I'm going to change this to it's by block. Yeah, that's because when I pulled it in, it showed up in green. I have to change the block. How do I change that? I'm just going to explode. I can't remember how to do this. And I'm going to take all of this and put it on white. Now I'll change the color. You have to explode it twice. It's on a section. 0. There we go. Don't ask. Match. There we go. I'm going to take and move this. There you go. You now have a building section. And a floor plan. Does that work for everyone? Okay. So no one, you guys never used this in any other classes. The thing is you have to clean up your floor plans and sections when you in design 3, 4, and 5. Because if you don't, the instructor's going to get PO'd. They're like, ooh. You're just using the technology without thinking about what's going on. All right. All right. Let's take a look at Richard Meyer. Oh, you know what? Richard Meyer changed the name of his firm. That's what happened. Here's the Frederick Smith house. Says Richard Meyer. Here's the house. So this is the name of the house itself. So Smith House is a work of contemporary architecture done by Meyer, a well-known architect in 1934, born in 34. So there you go. Here's a sort of a virtual. Someone did a video. Don't blame me on the music. Simple things. I have no idea why they chose that. So here we have, this is much more rocky. This is the house itself. It's a place to pull your boat in. This is the back of the house overlooking the water. What's fascinating about this is the side. So what do we have here? We have a floor, another floor, another floor. There's a series of columns. The columns are pulled back from the wall. And notice the girder. So the girder means that the floor joists are spanning over and the girder is supporting it. So this has got a structural girder system here, and you'll find a bearing wall here and a bearing wall back here. These kind of become important. Notice all the glass in the front, this little storage thing. This is the front of the house. So there's not many windows here. So what do we have here? There's a ramp up without a railing. Today this would be a code problem. There's the kitchen down here with high windows. There's the master bathroom with a big window. It's kind of weird. Windows upstairs on the upper floors and some windows on these bedrooms. The approach, water right here. So notice the front of the house doesn't have a whole lot of windows. It's the back that's completely opened up to the water. So you're coming in, the entrance floor is on the second floor. There's a lower level and a third floor, or an upper, third, second, first, or lower entry, upper floor. And then it's a deck up here. The chimney right here is actually detached from the house. So there's a fireplace on this level and this level, and then the chimney is actually pulled away from the house. Like, that's kind of weird. South elevation overlooking the water. East side, so here's the chimney. There's a deck here, there's a balcony here. This is a room up here. This is the ramp going in, front of the house. Here's the west elevation, so the chimney again, a deck out, a set of stairs out here to that deck on the other side. Open glass, that's that girder again. There's a plane that actually drops down. This is the stairs, the stair level in here. A section through the house as you walk up, floor, the roof, two-story space, chimney, fireplaces, roof, terrace. Here we have a section longitudinally, dining room, outdoor deck, living room in here, little sitting space underneath, sitting space above, bedrooms back here, roof. This is a section. These should really be pochade. Here's the interior view. Looking down from the balcony, the living room, the fireplace, the deck outside. There's a door, area back here. There's a sitting room up here. Go down these stairs and around. This is, again, looking at the living room. That's the balcony that took this view before. There's a balcony that actually looks down into just a little sliver of the dining room here. The hallway is underneath this balcony above, so it almost defines this as a circulation path. This is the first lower level of the first floor plan. Kayla? Kayla? I know you're engrossed in something. Kitchen on the lower level. A guest bedroom with a bathroom. The dining. So how do you get here? You have to go from the second floor down these stairs. Circulation here. This brings you out to a deck. That's a set of stairs. This is that storage room over here. This is the entry level closet. You walk in, when you walk in, the fireplace blocks the view, and as you walk further in, you open up to the expanse of water. This is the master bedroom with a closet and a bath. By the way, this is really small stuff. You may say to yourself, looks big in comparison to my house, but I'll show you the neighborhood. This is a tiny house in a gargantuan neighborhood. This is the third floor. Come up here, a balcony, a little sitting space, a bedroom, kind of an office and a bathroom, all overlooking the water. So these are the windows, this window, and that window. This is the back of the house. You can see the girder down here, the floor, girder, floor, girder, columns. So there's a structural grid in the back of the house, not attached to the wall, and then the rest of the house is essentially bearing walls. I really want to break out my ukulele. My daughter actually got a ukulele and she's playing it, and I'm like, it sounds great, Catherine. But you know, you don't say that, you'll crush her spirit. So Google Maps. So does this place actually exist? That's the house we're going to add on. This is one of the neighbors. So that's the house, right? Like, tiny house, right? It's just like as big as this wing. What about this one? Yeah, tiny house, right? This is Contentment Island off the Norwalk coast. These are Norwalk Islands over here. This is the Saugatuck Yacht Club is in here. And the Cedar Point Yacht Club is in here. I've been to both of these by sailboat. You believe it or not, you just can't sail across this. You have to sail around and follow the buoys if you want to get in here. It's kind of shallow. This is very rocky coast. What happened to all the sand? It was dropped off on Long Island by a glacier. This is just rocks. Connecticut coast is very rocky. I live right in here, and actually I can look across 16 and a half miles away and just see lights, but I cannot see the house. It's just too far. Let's go to Google Maps. Earth. You can't do Google Maps on these machines because Google takes too much data and stores it, so it's a security risk. And I'm like, who would have thought? Norwalk Islands. By the way, to get onto this, there's just this little bridge right here. This is a super ritzy, exclusive beach club, tennis courts. Let's just say these houses go, well, they just sold this house, I think for $14 million. It's a little tiny house. So remember, you're buying neighborhood. This is probably a $30 million house. So this is the locale. That's it. They wind up putting a terrible addition on. We're just going to ignore that. We're going to pretend we're just dealing with Richard Myers. So that's that storage unit. They did a few more things here. Let's face it, the house was too small. This is his garage. So this is one of the smaller houses in the neighborhood. By the way, this is all rocky out here. Like, would I ever sail my boat over here? No, those are rocks. Those are rocks. Those are rocks. I have a keel. Take the keel off. Sailing along at 6 knots in a 14,000-pound boat, and you hit a rock. Something bad's going to happen. Because your car's weighing, what's your car's weight? About 2,500 pounds? 14,000 is a lot of weight. Especially if it's fully loaded with gas and fuel and water and all the rest of the stuff. I do have AutoCAD floor plans that will help you with your analysis. There is one mistake. This right here is a dimension line. Make sure you delete that. Lower level, entry level, upper level. So these are plans. Yes, Jerry.
So what exactly are we going to do
We're
about
gonna-
this today?
We're going to break into groups and do the analysis. We're going to take a break, and then I'm going to break into the groups. I'll show you some of the analysis. But great question. All right. Let me go back to this document. So after we get to here, here's the methodology, 3D existing, 2D system, and then we're going to take the 2D and extrude it into a 3D setup. These are analytical drawings that we're going to wind up doing as a team. So we're going to get broken up into groups of, you have to find how many people in the class to do that. If you go further down, these are 3D drawings. At the end of the program sheet on Brightspace, you have this stuff. So this is a 3D model showing the front of the house. So you get a sense of what's happening here, like especially for additive and subtractive processes. Here's the back of the house. Here's a photo of it before the addition was put on. Here's the house here. You can see the rocks. Again, the house. This unfortunately has the addition. If I could crop that out, I would. The existing images. The site plan. The floor plans again. You can draw diagrams off these floor plans. You can just copy them and paste them into AutoCAD, or you can use the floor plans that I gave, or you could create your own floor plans. Section. Longitude, latitude sections. Richard Meyer himself. By the way, Richard Meyer was born in 1934. My mother-in-law went to high school with him. He's in the high school yearbook. Who would have thought? But he got himself into a little bit of trouble later on in life, and he got essentially kicked out of his firm. You can read about that, but it's not important. If I excluded every architect who did something, what we would consider not morally inappropriate, we'd have to exclude Frank Lloyd Wright, Corbusier, Louis Kahn, I don't know, all these creative people. They're all just out of their minds, but they're very good architects. Here's the section. It shows you, this is a golden rectangle, so that's a square, and then how he actually created that in section. And then the plan is actually based on that too. So Meyer's got a, he's really type A about how to do drawings. And by the way, circulatory plans, the enclosure plans, the hierarchical plans, the additive subtractive plans are all basically design one concepts. He's like, he did this, he graduated from Cornell with his Bachelor of Architecture degree, and he was really good at, you know, these systems thinking. Here we have our construction detail. So you can see the columns, the girders, the floor joists, the bearing walls behind. So it's important when you look at this to say to yourself, how do we think about this house? Cantilevered out. So this is really the surface of the glass. All right, why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll get back here at 11. I want to break. Give me the break. We'll be back